Hello, my name is Andrea Minucci and this is my project. So this is a 3D platformer side-scroller. Um, Here's I want to firstly show we have a checkpoint system. So if I die right at the beginning, I have a first checkpoint in here. And then we have some obstacles that deal damage when they hit me, and I have a health potion here that I can drink and regain some health. So this game was inspired by um, Little Big Planet for being a side scroller where you can also move on the z-axis and also on Fez as the world is built on all three dimensions. You can see here the camera will turn as I enter this other card. Here we have some more obstacles, some moving platforms. And also I have a checkpoint system, so if I die right now, we hear the words of checkpoint, so I will respawn here instead of at the beginning. Here we have some more obstacles, some spikes. If I hit them, I lose some HP. Another swinging axe and the end of the level. So let's get into the code. This is my player movement script. Here I have some variables for the speed, jump speed, check if a boolean to check if it's already jumping, another one to see if I can move, two vector trees, one for the inputs and one for the velocity that will apply to the rigid body to move it, a reference to rigid camera, rigid body, and animator, and to the main menu script which I used for the pose menu. I initialize my variables on the start, and then in the input I check if I'm pausing the game. Then I get my inputs and save them in a move input vector 3. And then I check my camera back forward vector and get a relative rotation. This is because this script lets me move relative to the camera perspective instead of always on the world axis. So then I will turn my character when it moves always on the right direction. Then I set up my move velocity vector 3. This is the first change I made to the script. It was for first this piece of code was just a move input square magnitude, but when I press two directions simultaneously, it would be 2, and that would, when multiplied by my movement speed, would let me move twice as fast. So I'm clamping the variable between 0 and 1. And the other part is I always keep my y velocity the same as the rigid body y velocity because I don't want to override that, or that would mess up my jump. When I jumped, without this line, I would teleport to the highest point of the jump and then fall back slowly. In the fixed update, if I can move, I'm setting the rigid body velocity equal to my move velocity. Then I check if I can jump and animate. Also, I'm adding a downward force when I'm falling. This is because I want the fall speed to be much faster. This is 1.5 times faster than the jump speed. I'm setting the animator variable for when moving. Here I check if I collide with the ground and set the is jumping variable to false so I can jump again. This is for when I enter a trigger box on the moving platforms. When I enter, I parent the character to the moving platform so I can move. It moves along it on its own, and I also have freedom of movement on the platform, and the player character unparents itself when it exits. Then we have the jump. I check if I'm pressing the button and if I'm not jumping. If I'm not jumping, I reset the y velocity because and then add a new force and set the is jumping variable as true. And lastly, we have a coroutine that stops the character for any given amount of time. This is our camera controller script. Here we save our player movement script, our target that the camera will follow, and an x and z variable, which are the distant on the corresponding axis, and a y variable, which is the relative distance to the player. Then we have a boolean if it can move on y or not, if the camera can move on y or not, and our move direction, either z or x. We also have a rotating boolean if the camera is rotating. Here in the update, we check if the camera is rotating. If it's not, we move it either on the x or z. The function, if it can move y, we update both the x and y, or only the x, and here we do the same, but with z instead of x. The rotate function, we give it as a parameter a direction, a position, and if it stops movement. Here we have the new rotation on the left or right. I could probably use only one. And we check the new rotation we want to rotate, and if you're not already in that rotation, then we set the new rotation and we start the coroutine for the smooth rotation. We set the new direction and the new x position, and we then start the coroutine for the smooth movement. This is the same for the other rotation. Here we check if it stops. After that, we check if it stops movement, and if it does, we call the player move.stop function with the amount of time we want to stop. The smooth rotate, we have the duration of the rotation and a counter which will increase in the while loop. We check if it's already rotating. If it is, we exit the function. If it's not, we set rotating as true. Then we set the current rotation as the current rotation. This will be our starting rotation in the linear interpolation function. And then the while. Here we check that the counter is less than the duration, and we increase it by time.delta time. Then we set the rotation equal to the linear interpolation using as our third parameter the counter divided by the duration, which means it will always be between 0 and 1, which is better when using lerp. It's the optimal choice. Here for the smooth movement is the same thing, but we're using a vector3 functions instead of the quaternion functions. Finally, we have a set can move on y. This will get modified by the camera rotate trigger boxes and set the can move y boolean. This is instead the camera rotate script, the one used in the trigger boxes. Here we have a reference of the camera controller, the player, depth of the camera position, and rotation. And then we have a boolean if the camera can move y while inside that trigger box, and if it should stop the player movement when it enters. Then we have a new enum, so we can use a variable to make a drop-down menu, and we use that to choose if we want to rotate left or right. Then when it enters the trigger, we set the camera rotation to 0 or 1 based on the enum, and if then the trigger was triggered by the player, we set the can move y of the camera to the can move y of these trigger boxes, and we call the rotate function. When it exits, we want to set back the camera controller move y to false, because if it's nested, we don't want to override the bigger or the outer trigger box. Now, what I would change if I were to work on this more, probably the inventory system. I have a very simple inventory system to keep track of the portions, and it's in the player stats script. I don't really like that. This was the faster way to do it. And also I would work more on the moving platforms. Sometimes they bug, and the only way to go forward is just restart the game. I don't know why that happened. I wasn't able to fix it, so that would be another thing I would work on more. And lastly, I will work more on the respawn system and checkpoint system. It's very simple. When I go to the checkpoint, I just move the respawn system, and it's okay for this, for something very simple. But if I were to work more, I would probably work on that more.